2018, truly a notable year. The Me Too hashtag gained international traction, the United States left the Iran nuclear deal, Kim Jong-un met Moon Jae-in in the DMZ, and Elon Musk launched a car into outer space. More importantly, however, one of my favourite movies released in Japan. Now, recall as the English title, even though it was shown only in Japan, of the Japanese movie which means Flying Tire. It's an adaptation of a novel which was released 12 years prior in 2006. The novel was also the subject of a TV adaptation in 2009, which I considered watching so that I could comment on the differences between them, but it was hard enough watching the movie, never mind a whole series. To make it clear, I love this movie because it's one of the worst I've seen. By all means, I should love it unironically based on its merits and contents. Men in black suits saying and people crying performed by the chiseled faces of some of the most attractive men I've ever seen. This movie ticks all the boxes required for me to consider it on an equal level to Pan's Labyrinth and DreamWorks' hit movie from the start of the millennium, The Road to El Dorado. Yet, as we will see, the movie is plagued with weird cinematography, a boring plot, and questionable characters. I want you to see this very real segment of the trailer, which perfectly encapsulates the directing seen in this movie. With that, I'll now begin the... I'm now going to go through this movie in detail, so that you can experience the same pain and confusion which I had to endure while making this video. In the year 2018, Tokuro Akamatsu runs a cargo transport company with the very creative name Akamatsu Transport. The movie lays it on pretty thick that he's the good guy of the story, as they show him talking to Miyashiro, who co-founded the company with his father. Miyashiro complains that the company is facing financial hardships, but Akamatsu is determined to protect everyone no matter what. That day, one of the couriers is en route when his tyre comes off and smacks a lady in the head. For some bizarre reason, they decided to make it look like she was smiling when she got bonked, and I can't help but find that hysterical. Anyway, so she gets splattered and the call comes through to Akamatsu Transport in an exceptional scene in which we only hear a succession of grunts. I'm aware that in Japanese, is a normal way of saying yeah, kind of like how we use but without the nuance of this knowledge, it appears insane. Again, I question why they made an English title to this movie when it requires so much knowledge about Japanese law, culture, and language, but I digress. Can we also talk about the unreasonably long time that the arm blocked this shot? I feel like I'm missing something symbolic because it looks just terrible. Akamatsu goes to the police where he meets knockoff Johnny Bravo named Shinji Takahata. Takahata informs Akamatsu that the woman died and he's permitted to see the driver. The driver says all the right things. He was going at a low speed, hit no potholes, and had nothing unusual during the journey. So, Akamatsu, Miyashiro, and Takashima go to the place the lady got splattered and find themselves unable to reconcile what has happened with the information they've been given. As a side note, I'm not sure that Takashima even talks in 90% of the scenes in which he features, so much so I had to go through the pictures of all the cast to find his character because I couldn't even remember his character's name. On that note, I came across the headshots of the cast, and some are just iconic. I hope to one day exude the stand user energy of Dai Watanabe and Simonosuke Murasugi. The gang leave the shrine, which for some reason, by the way, has drinks and snacks for the lady who splattered. I'm not 100% sure I know why the drinks, but I digress. So they leave this to go to the funeral. They unironically crash a funeral and are kicked out, but not before one of the attendees does a silly walk back in. Akamatsu becomes anxious about his future, concerned that he'll be tried as a criminal. He fires a delicious twink called Kadota, who did the pre-delivery inspection, because he assumes that it was him who allowed the accident to happen. It was confusing to me, a non-Japanese person, to try and understand why Akamatsu was being labelled as a murderer, even though he only runs the company. As much as I could find out before my attention span ran out, Japanese criminal law allows for a person to be imprisoned for up to 5 years if their acts or negligence within a company causes death, even if the death is outside of the company's employee base. The Transport Bureau raids the company, hoping to find proof that Akamatsu's records will show neglect in his processes. These bunch of nerds just steal a bunch of desks while they demand documents from the members of staff, which is on par for the police, so I'm not personally surprised, but that's neither here nor there. While getting the documents ready, Akamatsu learns that Kadota actually went above and beyond the inspection requirements, and we're reminded of Akamatsu's glorious "I'm a good manager" spiel as he says that he, quote, should have trusted his staff. He goes to Kadota's house to apologise, and the movie is ridiculously heavy-handed. His wife is pregnant, he looks like he's already struggling to make ends meet, and his family is the most wholesome that ever existed. Throughout this entire scene, Akamatsu has this just truly bizarre stance. You may not like it, but this is what peak apologetic posing looks like. Hope Motors, the makers of the truck, collects the wreckage to complete an inspection, trying to locate a cause of the accident. Akamatsu, however, is unable to get any information about what's happening and isn't being given his truck back despite his requests. At this point, Akamatsu Transport is in the news. Everyone has seen that the shipping company has caused an innocent mother to die and the police are investigating negligence, so Akamatsu isn't in a great place. The well of clients is drying up, so in order to make ends meet, he approaches Bank of Hope to request a loan of 30 million yen. At the time of writing this, 30 million yen is equivalent to approximately £180,000. We're told that the bank will not accept the loan request because they're afraid the company will go broke, but what becomes significant later is that, as the name suggests, Bank of Hope is a sister company to Hope Motors, with both being under the ownership of the Hope brand. To be clear, they don't publicly work together in this story. Akamatsu then tries reasoning with various parties, such as the bank and previous business partners, by saying how long they've worked together.
10年来一生懸命やらせていただいたつもりです。長い付き合いじゃないですか。
You can imagine how this goes. He's still broke. We then get to my favourite scene in the whole movie, and it requires zero context. Akamatsu returns home to his loving wife and child, but the choice of cinematography here is so peculiar. The director has a vision in mind, that much is evident, but it's impossible to tell what his message is. For example, his wife is the only brightly coloured figure in this scene, and it's supposed to reflect that she's a ray of light in the darkness, offering hope to Akamatsu. So, I could have understood that from how she unconditionally supports him throughout the movie. For the record, this movie isn't applicable for the Bechdel test because it doesn't even feature two women talking to each other at any point. There's also something which doesn't quite translate into English, which I couldn't help but bring up. Akamatsu's wife, whose name I still don't know, tries to be helpful by saying that she'll work on the problem with Takuro, the son, but the choice of subtitles makes it sound like she's a mob boss who's going to make Takuro sleep with the fishes.
タクロのことは私に任せて。よく言い聞かせておくから。
I mentioned weird directing. Why is Akamatsu so sweaty? He's wetter than Ernest Timmins in To Catch a Predator. The wife isn't dripping with sweat, so I don't believe it's a temperature issue, but why now and only now does he look like he just got out of a swimming pool? The next day, Akamatsu goes to work to talk to a worker who is busy hammering a wheel. He receives a call from Hope Motors, who confirm that Akamatsu's company poorly maintained the vehicle. Here we meet best boy and primary twink, Sawada. Sawada may not look familiar, but the weeaboos, is that a term we use in 2023? Am I cringe? The weeaboos may know the name of the actor, Dean Fujioka. In my opinion, he's most notable for his performance of the opening of Yuri on Ice. So it was very fun watching him in his role while imagining him making out with a skater twink. Getting back on track, Akamatsu seeks a re-evaluation from Hope Motors because, as we saw earlier, the transport company actually went above and beyond their inspection requirements, so Akamatsu is sure that Hope is wrong in their judgment. Sawada, being a typical middle manager, tries to dodge all calls in which he's requested because he stands by his company. The scenes following this can be almost entirely ignored because they just show how often Akamatsu tries to get Sawada to give him attention. Honestly, Mood, I would also beg for his attention. Look at him. Despite how meaningless these scenes are, two extremely funny shots happen. There's a scene where Akamatsu is presumably watching his son in a park while he's trying to call Hope Motors, as a means of showing that his intention is to look after his family. The problem though is that they don't make it clear which one is Takuro, because we've only seen him once, so the editing makes it look like he's watching kids in the playground before driving away. There's also a minor scene where Akamatsu is explaining to a co-worker why he's fighting the case so hard, but it's impossible to take seriously because he does this. Akamatsu sits down with Miyashiro, who reveals that a few years ago there was an incident similar to theirs, and that everything is a mirror image. The police investigated and used Hope Motors' inspection report to hold the company criminally liable because the cause was found to be poor maintenance. Again, there's a very mundane scene here, which can be summarized by saying that Akamatsu meets the person involved in the case and is told everything we already know. We now return to Sawada, who is approached by Muroi, a colleague in quality assurance. Muroi asks Sawada to make Akamatsu capitulate and to stop trying to dig any deeper, but this causes Sawada to suspect something foul is afoot because why else would a senior colleague, and one from another department, be so well informed and interested in this one case? Also, I'm sorry for talking about different scenes so quickly, but I'm not exaggerating when I say that most scenes in this movie last for no greater than 4 minutes. There's even one towards the end that lasts for 20 seconds. The pacing is just as confusing when you watch it, so I promise this isn't a skill issue. Akamatsu then learns that Hope Motors have blamed the tyre hubs as being neglected, so when he recommends a third party confirm the findings, Hope says that they have dismantled the part and that it's in no condition to be returned. Sawada also finds out this information, so makes a clandestine meeting with a colleague from research and development in order to understand more of what's happening. He learns a shocking bit of information which could not be any less interesting if it tried. R&D and quality assurance have been having secret meetings to discuss known issues with trucks, but do you want to know what these meetings are called? T meetings.
タイヤの T です。
The T stands for tyre. They are tyre meetings. The next day, Sawada meets up with Muroi, who pulls a classic anime face, and they have a verbal altercation. Frustrated by this, Sawada approaches his boss, who says that he'll get quality assurance to back down, only to be told about 20 seconds later that he's received pressure from above to drop it. Sawada agrees to talk to Akamatsu, as the seed of distrust within his own mind now starts to sprout, and we get one of the funniest meetings of Titans.
はじめまして。聞いてると思うがハブの返却の件だ。
Consider the amount of information we've received so far, and then consider the fact that we're not even halfway through the runtime of the plot. Lucky for you, I wrote fewer and fewer notes as time went on because I couldn't be fucked to keep up with everything. Sawada and his friend from R&D go into the office after hours to see if they can find out more about the team meetings, and finds out there's been meetings between Hope Motors and Bank of Hope. This is important because, as I mentioned earlier, they're not publicly working together. We're now introduced to 2 more characters. Yuko Enomoto, a journalist for Choryo Weekly, and Kazuaki Izaki, the accounts manager for Bank of Hope. Christ alive, there are so many characters. Let's do a quick recap. Akamatsu owns Akamatsu Transport and is fighting for his freedom. His 2 right-hand men are Miyashiro and Takashima. They employ Kadota, who inspected the truck before it hit the road. The detective, Takahata, is investigating them for the death of Mrs. Yugi. Sawada is the customer strategy chief in sales promotion at Hope Motors. He works with Shigemichi Komaki, his friend in R&D. Komaki is a friend of Gen Sugimoto, who works in quality assurance. They are all subordinates under Muroi, whom we hate. These 3 and Muroi work for the same company that's led by Kano Takeshi, whom we meet later. Izaki is the accounts manager at the Bank of Hope, and he may or may not have dated Yuko, who knows. All clear? Good. So as I was saying, Izaki meets with Yuko, who makes him aware that a whistleblower is about to blow the top on a problem at Hope Motors, and it's my guess that this is because she cares about him and wants him to get out of the company before shit hits the fan. She explains that the Bank of Hope kept Hope Motors afloat when they were exposed for a cover-up from 3 years ago. Izaki meets Kano Takeshi, who requests 30 billion yen, which is about 180 million pounds, and Izaki, aware of their scandalous nature, plays coy, saying that he will have to consider the proposal. Hope Motors is aware that a quality assurance laptop was accessed without permission, and deems this a breach of security, which tightens the noose around Sawada, our modern Guy Fawkes, and his accomplices. Yuko visits Akamatsu and makes him aware of the previous scandal. She does this by presenting him with a tablet which, for some reason, Akamatsu uses with the heaviest taps imaginable. We learn that Takeshi was the chief of quality assurance at the time of the scandal, but has since been promoted to executive director, which means that the person in charge is aware of the previous scandals and is in a position to let them happen. At this point, Sawada appears to lose his damn mind because he writes a letter informing the company that he believes there is a cover-up at play. He gives it to his boss, who gives it to his boss, and so on, until it reaches, you guessed it, Takeshi. In a private meeting, Takeshi says that Sawada could only have known about a cover-up because someone else must have leaked it, so there are 2 snakes in the grass. His yes-man believes that Sugimoto is believed to be the culprit, but you'll never guess why. he decided to report the conspiracy to Choryu Weekly using a company telephone. So, Takeshi does two things. He gives Sawada a promotion because he's a whistleblower, and they'll be found out if they fire him. They will, however, try to make him so unhappy that he leaves. Meanwhile, Sugimoto will be fired because he remained anonymous. Sawada is invited to a meal with HR, complete with alcohol and pretentious food. As someone who's had extremely poor experiences with HR departments, the idea of sharing a table with one of those reptiles makes my skin crawl. Speaking of things which get under my skin though, please look at the following segment of the film. It appears that their food has just arrived, and they completely ignore it to talk. Why not plan the conversation for when you arrive or after you've eaten? What if Sawada didn't take the job? Were you just planning to awkwardly eat while facing each other? Anyway, Sawada is offered his dream job in product development, but it comes at a cost. He must leave his current predicament with Akamatsu to his successor. He's given some time to think, so Sawada later meets with Akamatsu as a last-ditch effort to fix the problem. He will offer compensation regularly until the parts are returned to Akamatsu to the amount of 100 million yen, which is about £600,000. Akamatsu is given a chance to consider the sum, so he uses this time to, again, crash a memorial to Mrs. Yugi, the victim of the crash. Akamatsu and co assert their innocence publicly, yet offer apologies to Yugi, so from his perspective it looks like they're just paying lip service. I'd agree with his point if it weren't for the fact that Yugi looks like a pathetic nerd. Like, look at his stance compared to Akamatsu, it's like a Virgin vs. Chad meme. Yugi then acts for his life in a very natural fall to the floor. After ruining this, Akamatsu returns to his car when the woman's child runs over and gives him a program which features his own account of what happens. It's unintentionally funny because it can be summarized as, I was walking with my mum and she said she'd make me hamburgers. I miss her because I didn't get my hamburgers. Akamatsu then returns home, sees his son and cries at him, which again is unintentionally hilarious. He returns to Sawada and gives him the funeral program as the reason why he can't accept the offer. Sawada storms off to accept the new job. Yuko, having previously promised that the article would be published, tells Akamatsu that the story couldn't be published because both subsidiaries of the Hope brand are big advertisers in the magazine. What confuses me about this is surely Yuko would have known, or her boss has just let her have free reign for a week and hasn't at any point asked what she's doing. There are then some sequences in which Akamatsu is told that the bank wishes for him to pay any outstanding balances, and Yogi is also going to sue him for 150 million yen. Following this, Akamatsu goes to kill himself by crashing his car only to cow it out. He returns home to find out that his son, who, if you remember, looks to be about 7, is being cyberbullied. Please enjoy the scene where we see Akamatsu read some of those mean comments.
Laughing in rhythm.
I'm going to skip a few scenes because the movie has each of them last for about 30 seconds each, so they can be summarized as follows. Yuko visits Akamatsu and gives him details of previous incidents, but can't show him what she's written so far. Sawada finds out Sugimoto was the other whistleblower who got demoted. Sawada gets treated like shit at work. Akamatsu visits the people on the list provided by Yuko, and they all refuse to talk to him for reasons not explained. Miyashiro tries to get the co-workers to find work elsewhere so that they can jump ship. However, they do an I'm Spartacus, and insist on staying.
角田の言う通りです。社長が諦めていないなら、私たちも諦めません。俺も社長を信じてついていきます。ついていきます。戦います。
Eventually, Akamatsu finds someone who is willing to talk to him, and explains that they did their own research. On the way to this place, there's a shot of Akamatsu eating, for some reason. Regardless, the garage explains that Hope Motors found it was a propeller shaft, but in reality, their own research suggests that it was a failure of the clutch housing. This is the case for most of the accidents, including, so it seems, Akamatsu's. He delivers all of this to the police, who aren't particularly interested. Before I forget, I want to bring up a huge bone I have to pick with this movie. I know next to nothing about cars, but from what I can glean from about 5 minutes of research on Google, the clutch housing is nowhere near the tyre. Why couldn't he have figured this out himself? I feel like I'm no longer Copus Mentis. Like, surely the average person wouldn't know what a clutch housing is or where it is in relation to the hub. Moving on, Nagaoka, Sawada's replacement, meets with Akamatsu and introduces himself in one of the strangest, most neurodiverse ways possible.
私は沢田のように甘くはありませんよ。今日はどのようなご用件で？
Akamatsu brings his research and explains that propeller shaft problems are rare, yet they're common in all of the unexplained crashes with Hope Motors. Nagaoka brings up a trump card and asks whether he even checked their maintenance records, to which Akamatsu begins to say, well, no.
そもそもこの富山ロジスティックという会社がきちんと整備していたかどうか、あなた実際に調べたんですか？
確かに調べてません。
But then does an alley-oop by saying that he didn't need to because the truck at that incident was new. I'll try not to ask the obvious question of why didn't the guy challenge this. When presented with this information, Nagaoka acts almost cartoonish in his response, and could not have been more obvious that there was a conspiracy if he tried.
茶だったんですよ。長岡課長。
は？
Nagaoka approaches Takeshi, who says that there should be no further interactions with Akamatsu before being met with an extremely wheezy response. The police now address the documents given to them by Akamatsu, and they agree to review their stance and investigate Hope Motors instead. Sugimoto gives Sawada an old laptop he had from when he worked in QA. He explains that he got it 3 months ago because it stopped working but later learnt it was just software related, so he restored and kept it. Don't ask any questions, we don't have time. While going through its contents, Sawada stops to read the funeral program given to him by Akamatsu. We then get some less than great acting of him being depressed in a taxi. It literally looks like he's doing that thing we all did as children where you listen to a sad song and look out the window of a car to imagine you're appearing in a music video. He again meets Akamatsu and opens up, saying that the death felt unreal before he read the program, and then just says to give up because he's done all he can. Akamatsu goes to his crew to apologise because the company would need to close, but everyone runs into the room to turn on the TV. It's a Christmas miracle! Hope Motors are being raided by the police for falsified accident information.
今日午前、神奈川県警と港北中央警察署は道路運送車両法違反の疑いでホープ自動車を家宅捜索し、現在も続いている模様です。
Karuta breaks the tension in the most adorable way possible. He's just precious. Takeshi is now being interviewed by Takahata, who reveals he has more than just inconsistent documents. He has the laptop. But when he presents it, he smugly turns the chair around like everyone's dad when they try to relate to their child, like, hey son, let's rap. But when presented with this information, Takeshi looks like he's about to whip out his cock instead. Takahata, very excited by this, begins to beat the shit out of the laptop. Some other stuff happens which ties up a few loose ends, but I can't be fucked to bring them up. Instead, I want to show you how weirdly it ends. For context, Akamatsu and Sawada meet at the scene of the crash and semi-homoerotically say they never want to see each other again. I'm going to leave this scene completely unedited so you can see how bizarre it wraps up and their choice of music for the credits.
いい天気だ。
After having watched this movie again 5 years after I first watched it, none of my opinions have changed. Everything wraps up anticlimactically, no information is given about technical aspects of the crash, and when we think about it, we don't really get closure. There's a scene where Izaki is refused a date with Yuko, and Yugi withdraws his lawsuit and apologizes, but neither are really worth showing. They feel about as meaningful as the characters looking into the camera and saying, "It's me, the character. I have grown as a person and the way I was presented earlier has changed." Finally, I want to give an honourable mention to a scene that I couldn't bring up during my description of the plot. Bearing in mind, the scene I'm about to show you takes place 15 minutes before the movie ends, so I'll ask you whether 15 minutes is enough time for a movie like this, which is entirely about interpersonal conflicts, can be resolved in 15 minutes. There's the scene in which Akamatsu is sat in his office despairing. He's dreading the future, he's obviously stressed, but the scene offers nothing we hadn't already known. By all means, I'm impressed with the cinematography and could actually appreciate it if the rest of the movie had been more artistically expressive, but instead it disrupts the pacing and just doesn't fit in with the rest of the film. Would I recommend the 2018 movie Recall? If you're neurotypical and love business, yeah, it's worth a watch. To anyone who isn't Vincent Adultman, I'd recommend you spend 2 hours on the London Underground overhearing any conversation held by people in suits. I'm sure you'd be just as lost, bored, and flaccid as I was.